Welcome to Songs for Humanity. The emptiness you sometimes feel in life can at its best serve as a clarifying contrast, a driver to the meaningfulness of your life. At its worst, it can be insurmountable and even lethal. What do I mean by emptiness in this case? I'm talking about the lack of personal meaning in life, despite things being okay at the surface level. So even though you have a roof over your head, you have food, clothing, a livelihood, etc., you're still ultimately left feeling like none of it matters and everything's just pointless in a way that feels bad. I'm not limiting this definition to just clinical depression though, because I feel like it can also affect people who are not necessarily depressed. But where does it come from? The image that comes to my mind when I try to think about it is about some prehistoric human ancestors sort of slowly waking up with this weird new consciousness, like coming into a new sense of the reality around you, but not having any idea what it's about. And coupling that with the new power of imagination then leads to the early humans forming their own stories about how and why things came to be. And those stories then being an important provider for people's sense of meaningfulness ever since, to this day. By the way, Tim Urban writes really well about all this at waitbutwhy.com. You should definitely go check out the ongoing series there. But the fact that for a person there's absolutely no way of seeing past the curtains of their surrounding subjective reality brings about the unfortunate side effect of the ever-looming feeling of the emptiness. I mean, we are an animal that developed to be a super intelligent species, specialized in asking why about everything. So it's no wonder that there's a possibility for some internal turmoil when the biggest of all why questions cannot be definitively answered. But the thing is that some people seem to function just fine despite all this. So what's the secret to that then? I look out the window and feel nothing matters. All entities and forms are empty. What can I do in this situation? I must face the facts. There are no given meanings in the world. This means that I myself must set those meanings, because anybody else cannot do it. I am simply forced to choose or decide alone the meaning and manner of my existence. This is because the individual has no intrinsic value. He has only this rugged emptiness. I consider myself a reasonably thoughtful person, but I must admit that I spend virtually none of my time worrying about the meaning of life, or about whether anything really matters. I have a pretty scientific or materialistic view of the universe, which makes me think that yes, on a grand metaphysical scale, nothing I do really matters. However, my day-to-day experiences in the human realm imbue me with a strong sense that what I do matters a great deal, not only to my own well-being, but to all people and things with whom I interact. I don't seem to have another option but to believe that there is some grand, mysterious, metaphysical meaning and purpose behind the world we see. Whenever I momentarily manage to adopt a materialistic worldview, the world starts to look like a very cold and purposeless place. I absolutely need to have a background feeling that there is some great purpose and plan. Then I can go about my life quite happily. So there's a lot of ways to go about this. I've also had to deal with this a lot during my life, but I consider myself lucky that I never fell really deep into the emptiness. For me, what seems to do the best job is to work on accepting it. Sometimes I find myself under this self-inflicted mental pressure to not feel empty. And when I'm in that state of mind, it's difficult to realize that the pressure actually makes it much more difficult. The greater the pressure is, the more difficult it is to find good enough meanings to beat the pressure, so to speak. And then when I manage to realize that it's actually totally okay to feel empty, it immediately eases the pressure and makes it easier to derive meaning from smaller things. Contentment is a thing I try to practice regularly. As someone wisely said, don't strive for happiness, strive for contentment, because contentment is a much more sustainable feeling than pure happiness. Kurzgesagt made a good video about optimistic nihilism, which seems like a popular way to look at things nowadays. Optimistic nihilism basically just states that since life seems to have no intrinsic meaning or value, everyone can just define these things themselves, and that way sort of free themselves from the burden of the emptiness, and rather embrace it and build from it. It's certainly a comforting idea, though I find that it's also a difficult one to really internalize because of the supposition that there isn't any intrinsic meanings. To me, it actually feels like it would be better put as sort of a dualistic conundrum, that there either is a reason behind all this or there isn't, and in both cases it's fine. That's how I think anyway. It's a shame that many people seem to think that this sort of worldview has to be built on the fact that life has no intrinsic meaning and that everything exists just by a random chance. I think it's a little premature to be that certain about these things when we are still so far away from really understanding how the universe works. I mean, we still don't know why and how exactly this roll of duct tape falls down when I release it. And by that I'm just referencing the fact that our current understanding of gravity as a force doesn't really fit in the standard model of physics, because there's a conflict between Einstein's relativity and quantum mechanics, and I don't really understand much about it, but I'm just saying that it seems safe to say that we can't be entirely sure about the origins and meanings of the universe either. Anyways, life is a lot to take in, isn't it? It gets overwhelming at times, for sure. And that's why I think it's okay to take a mental break sometimes. If you're battling with this emptiness, just go do something nice with other people and indulge in the feelings that these pesky humanly social constructs produce. And if you feel like you don't have friends to do that with, maybe it's family, maybe it's some volunteer group near you, maybe gaming, book clubs, board game meetups, church, animal shelter volunteering. There's a lot of places you'd be very welcome in. And one thing is for sure, we are lucky to not be alone in this confusing world. Thanks for watching, and may your life be filled with contentment.